Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Prize Podcast where we talk about how sports and the Christian worldview intersect one another. I'm Kyle Hunsinger. It's good to have you back on the show. If you'd like to know more about me, you can email me at pursuetheprize@gmail.com, or you can follow me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at KMoneyDH. Well, it's good to be on the show today where we talk about sports and how the Christian worldview intersect one another. Today's sporting news, we have a couple different ones. The hot news of the day that I wanted to report on today, or comment on today, is the news about Blake Anderson. If you remember a little while back, he was one of the ones that he basically was fired by Utah State, and when he was fired by Utah State, there was a lot of controversy on if it was an improper firing or not. And so now Blake Anderson is looking to counteract and hopefully sue some of the people that brought in. He's gonna go against Utah State, but he's also going to go against some of the judicial system that has brought him this type of conflict. And so one of the things that it brings into the article, this one comes from ESPN.com. Utah State fired Anderson after an internal investigation concluded he violated Title IX policies. He was, which was related to basically reporting about sexual misconduct. Um, Supposedly, this one says that it was suggested that he improperly contacted a girlfriend and roommate of a football player accused of domestic violence in a fact-finding mission. And so, a really interesting situation. But then Anderson told ESPN he had nothing to do in handling the matter. His attorneys called Utah State's explanation for the firing misinformation. I find that wording misinformation very interesting, um, because a lot of times that does happen in sports. There's misinformation, even in the media. There can be misinformation. Excuse me, got it. My throat is like all jacked up right now. But anyways, but it's really intriguing that this is being brought forth. It seems to be that he may have a really good counteraction to this. So there's going to be a lot of things going on to see how this fight actually goes and who's actually telling the truth. Another fight that's taking place is between the ACC and Clemson and Florida State. Right now, what it is looking like is Clemson and Florida State, and then the ACC, they're in a battle, but they're going to kind of put their ways aside so that they can actually have a season. It's kind of like one of those awkward moments where you're in a fight as a family and you got in a fight, but you're still kind of having to coexist in the same house. And so you're trying to be somewhat cordial, but you still have the bridges that have been burned. And that's kind of where it is with Clemson and South Carolina, or not Clemson, South Carolina, Clemson and Florida State. As you have known from the news, they've been trying to get out of the ACC in their granted rights deal. Jim Phillips actually just recently came out, and I want to make sure I quote this correctly. He putting in here in an interview that he had through ESPN. I'm willing to fight. Basically, he words an accountability for Florida State and for Clemson. He claims Florida State and Clemson, you were wanting to get in a deal. Um, you agreed to that deal, and you need to uphold that deal. That's Jim Phillips' view. Okay. Now, Clemson and Florida State on the other end saying, hey, yes, but the ACC is not doing their due diligence either to make sure that they're financially stable. Uh, Adding Stanford, adding California, and adding SMU does not add to your cachet. Okay. So basically, they're trying to really get into a conflict with one another. Obviously, Clemson and Florida State want out. North Carolina is kind of in the precipice of that, but they've kind of backed off. I think they've remained a little bit more quiet, even though they're probably the one that's the most attractive candidate right now, just because of them being in North Carolina. The SEC has not reached out to North Carolina, the state of North Carolina. I'm sure there's been other things going down behind the scenes, but you just never know. So anyways, so you have all this misinformation and fight, and then this next part was the fight that's going on between these two conferences. And I think this is very interesting because this relates a lot to the Christian life in that a lot of times when we are face to face with the enemy, and we must agree that there is an enemy. There's an enemy. His name's Satan. And unfortunately, a lot of times what happens is as Christians, we believe his lies and his misinformation. And what we need to remember is that there's a fight at hand. There's a fight that's between, um, you know, really God's people and the powers of darkness. The scriptures say we do not wrestle with flesh and blood, but we wrestle with the principalities, the spiritual powers of darkness. That is really what's at war right now when we consider the Christian warfare and putting on the spiritual armor of God. Well, in my study of Exodus, that's exactly what I see is a spiritual warfare taking place. But yet, what we forget a lot of times is the one who's the commander, the king, and the one who's going to defeat the enemy. It's not us. It's not anyone else. It's not a political candidate. It's not, a coach or anyone else or any type of leader that we can configure. Israel tried to do that, but what they found out was God was really the true king, and he would be the one to bless the kingship of whoever was installed. Ultimately, Jesus fulfilled that perfectly. Jesus went to the cross, and he died on the cross and rose from the grave, and that's the reason why, here we go, that's the reason why we win the fight. Not because of our works, not because of what we've done, but because of what Christ has done. But what you see in the story of Exodus is you see the story of Pharaoh giving out misinformation. He's basically saying, I will, and this is going through the story of the plagues, the story that I'm studying this week. He's always making this promise, like, okay, I'll let your people go, but, and he gives a compromise or tries to give some type of compromise or misinformation. The misinformation part, the part I'm focusing on today, is the part where he says, I'm going to forgive you, or sorry, I need to be forgiven. That he sinned. He's like, I've done a great sin. Oh, please appeal to God for me. Appeal to the Lord. And that's what he asked Moses to do. But yet it says he continues to harden his heart. And that's the key to this whole thing, is that you have a man, he's not the God man, even though the people of Egypt thought he was, and he is speaking false narratives and not doing what he's supposed to do, but God continues to show through the plagues. God says, I'm going to do this. I'm going to multiply these wonders against Pharaoh in Egypt because I am the Lord. God continues to keep his promises while Pharaoh doesn't keep his promises. So remember that this week as you're walking through whatever situation in your life. Remember, the world and Satan's has some type of dominion over the world, but it's ultimately under the authority of God. He can only do so much under the authority of God and God's sovereignty. But we've really got to think through what misinformation are we believing in? What's the misinformation that we're allowing Satan to tell us or the world to tell us, and we say, oh, that's got to be true? Or do we actually believe what God says? Because here's the deal, God has never lied, and he has always kept his promises, and he would continue to do that in the book of Exodus by delivering his people, and he does that for you today by delivering you from sin and death. How? Because of a true exodus, the departure that came through Jesus Christ, departing to go to Jerusalem, as it talks about in the book of Luke, to die on the cross. He rose from the grave, and now we get to be the bearers of the one of that good news so that people can be delivered from sin and death and that type of slavery. So remember that today as you connect sports and the Christian worldview. It's a great time. Again, if you want to know more about me, you can go ahead and email me, pursuetheprize@gmail.com, or here's the deal. You can also follow me on Twitter, or now known as X, at KMoneyDH. Thank you for joining in on the show. Leave me a message. Tell me what you think about it. Tell me what you think on Facebook or whatnot, YouTube, whatever that may be. I hope you have a wonderful day. Like us on YouTube, on the Prize Podcast, and we will see you next time for another episode of the Prize Podcast.